telephone, Michael?
Good morning and welcome to this month's Cybermentoring. My name is Claudia Gutierrez and I'm with the Paths 2 project at Region 1 Education Service Center. And we are welcoming Claudia Luna today. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Claudia is an occupational therapist with DHR Health Orthopedic and Sports Therapy Institute. And we're so excited to have you here today. This is definitely one of the top 5 occupations that students have been asking for and wanting to hear more about. And we're excited to have you. We're going to take a moment to let everybody get into the meeting and get settled. Students, I do want to remind you or tell you if you've never participated in this before, that we are recording the session. At this time, you are muted and you do not have the ability to chat or unmute yourselves. We want to give Ms. Luna the opportunity to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll open up the chat for any questions that you might have. So as she's talking, think of things that you might want to hear her. I'll be able to relay those to her. So Miss Luna, let's hear all about yourself.
Hi, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be talking, especially in the month of April, because April is OT month. So this is a perfect opportunity.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So my name is Claudia Luna, and I'm an occupational therapist here with the DHR Ortho and Sports Therapy. I have about 20-something years of experience. I graduated high school when I was 16 and went straight into the OTA program at STC. So I started my career first as an occupational therapist assistant, and then later on went to Texas Women's University to receive my master's degree in occupational therapy. So that's a quick.
So you went to, before you went away to school, you went to school in the Valley?
I went to PSJA. Yes, that's my stomping grounds is PSJA.
They're one of our Paths districts, so we probably have PSJA students with us today.
All right. Yeah, so I'm a native from here. Graduated, like I said, from PSJA. I was kind of not sure what career to go into. I just really knew that I wanted something to do with athletics, something that had to do with the body, something more physiological. And I was gearing more in towards the science okay. and physical sports is right. What I really wanted to do. And so I had never heard of occupational therapy before. I had only heard of physical therapy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at that time, this was almost 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it was either between physical therapy or athletic trainer until I ran into occupational therapy. So it's a funny story, kind of almost a success story, I would say.
Good.
When I took my ACTs, my college testing, I didn't score well. I scored at the bottom 10%. And so I really wanted to go to Texas A&M or Texas University.
Right.
But I didn't have the scores for big universities.
Okay.
So the recommendation was to start at a community college. And I would like to say that I graduated from Texas Women's University, which is ranked number 9 in the whole nation for occupational therapy.
You said Texas Women's University?
Texas Women's University is ranked
correctly. Our Dr. Alvarado, who's the director for the Paths program, went there also.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a wonderful school. So I would like to encourage all students who have taken their college exams and they have not scored well. Don't let it deter you from your future goals. You might have to take a different career path or educational path than somebody else. I was 16 when I entered college, so maybe that's why I scored not so well. Mm-hmm. But I took that path that where anybody would accept such a young student at that time. And luckily here at STC, they don't have an entry that's super, super high. And
Right.
so I was able to start there and then go on to graduate from a prestigious school.
Right. So you found a path.
Sure.
And it may not be the traditional path, but you found a path that worked for you.
That's right.
That's wonderful. That's a very great success story. Congratulations. So what did you do after you finished at Texas Women's?
After I finished from Texas Women's, I found a job working with pediatrics, working with children. I have experience working with different populations. Before that, I did a field work, which is part of your education. Is they put you in internships, and you're able to have experience with working in hospitals, nursing homes, working with children, working in the schools, so that you can finally find what your area of passion is. And so when I graduated, I found a job with pediatrics, working with children. And so I love that. I was able to work at an outpatient facility and then transition into the schools. So occupational therapists do work in school districts as well. And of course, in every setting that you do work in, your job tasks are slightly a little bit different, but they're geared towards the same.
Right.
So I'm sorry.
So
I just wanted to kind of say what occupational therapy is.
Right.
Occupational therapy is a therapy that is delivered to any person, regardless of age, regardless of disability or capability. So what we do is we help you regain function so that you can be independent again. So for example, a newborn baby who was just born, maybe premature, what occupations does that baby have? Because obviously they're not out in the workforce,
Right.
But at such a young age, their occupation is to sleep, to grow. They're in the hospitals trying to get better, and their one job is to get healthy, which is to sleep. So sometimes when babies are born prematurely, sometimes it interferes with some of the sensory process. So we go in there and we maybe snuggle them up with a little blanket and work on their sensory system. And that type of therapy is occupational therapy, but that would look different working in the school district. You're not going to wrap a child up in the school district. So the way therapy would look in the school district would be if there's a child that is unable to access their educational setting in the schools. Say, for example, he or she doesn't have, maybe has a missing arm and is not able to carry or lift their books or participate in physical education activities, the occupational therapist would suggest modifications and adaptations to the teacher to make that student independent in accessing their education. So that would be the role for that student. And then as far as adults, any occupation that an adult has, or even a teenager as a student, your occupation would be to go to school, to be a friend, to socialize. If you have a part-time job, and to study. If you're in athletics or if you're a dancer, those are your occupations right now. So if you happen to come across a life-changing situation where you're not able to participate in those activities again, occupational therapists can help you regain some independence by maybe suggesting a different type of keyboard, or maybe suggesting different pencil grips, or just modifying the way you do things. That's where occupational therapy would come in. As far as what I do right now is I work in the sports department, and what we see is a lot of orthopedic conditions. We see a lot of people who have fallen or maybe have injured themselves in sports, and those are injuries in which within 3 or 4 months, they're able to regain their function again. So we rehabilitate them using a rehabilitation model, and we work on exercises, stretching, just a variety of things that we can do. And I have a couple of things here to show whenever you think it's appropriate.
Oh, that would be great. Why don't we do that?
Okay. So whenever somebody comes in, what we do is an evaluation, and we measure their joints. So I'm not sure if you've seen one of these measurements. It's called a goniometer. So for those of you taking or who have taken geometry and you think, when am I ever going to use this ever again in life? Well, you'll use it in occupational therapy. So it's a measuring tool, and it measures in angles, 0 degrees, 90 degrees of how your joint moves. So for example, if I'm measuring the elbow here, I would move my elbow, and then it would tell me the degrees, right? We also have smaller ones and much more smaller than this to measure the wrist. And this is how we also measure progress to show the client or their physicians that the therapy is indeed working, or sometimes the therapy has plateaued. The patient has plateaued, and we might find a different plan for them. But this is what I wanted to show. We also have a measuring tape, and it's in inches and centimeters. And what we do is we measure swelling. So whenever we have somebody with a swollen finger or any body part to the hand, we'll go in there and we'll measure. And we'll say, okay, that's 6 centimeters, and we'll compare it to the unaffected hand to see how much more swollen it is to the other finger. So that gives us measurement data to show the insurance companies, to show the doctors, to show the client that this finger is so much more swollen than this one, and we have evidence to prove that it's not just something we're making it up or just, oh yeah, I think your finger's swollen.
Yeah. Looks better. It looks better. Well, I can tell you as a mathematician, I'm very excited about what you just showed, because I did teach math, and I know that in every occupation they use math in some way, shape, or form. But to see geometry, very exciting.
Yes. So I also have, some of you may have seen people in sports or in different situations using tape along their bodies, along their shoulders. We also sometimes, not all the time, just depending on the need of the patient, there are different ways to cut kinesio tape. I'll show you a quick sample real here. So here's the tape. It does have a little paper back here in which we peel at the end, but this tape can be cut in different ways. But what matters is the application. You can't just put the tape on you just because everybody else is doing it, or it's the cool look to have as an athlete. You really have to know your anatomy, because depending on how you anchor the tape into the insertion or the origin of the muscle group that you want to activate can either help or further injure you even more. So that's one thing that I wanted to just share out there is it's not a fashion trend. You do need to know your anatomy and placement. It can also be used for swelling for people that have had a recent injury. Can be cut in different directions. And of course, just depending on how you place it, the tape can help drain some of that liquid into a lymph node. So anatomy is a foundation in occupational therapy, right, in which you would have to be study up on that.
Yes.
I also have.
You have great toys.
I also have this, it's called a splint. And what we use this one in particularly for is people who have had a broken wrist, and the doctor will prescribe for the occupational therapist to fabricate one like this so they can wear, and it can stabilize the joint. So it would look like this, and it's custom made. It's not like you can buy, like they do sell universal braces at Walgreens or different pharmacy stores,
Right.
but they're just universal. They're not custom made. So when the doctor orders a specific one, the neat part about occupational therapists is you can say, hey, I created something for individualized for my client. So for those of you who are into building, being creative, engineering, like this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to show you the process as how I made this.
Yes.
Well, it's not going to be a true process because I need hot water to mold this. But what it would start off with is a hard plastic like this. Obviously, I used a white one to do this one, but I'm going to use a hard blue one.
Okay.
So there are different types of material. It's called thermoplastic, which means that it heats up and it changes its shape in very, very, very boiling hot water. So what we would end up doing is having a slab like this, getting a piece of paper and having the patient's arm or wrist onto this paper, and we would trace it. So I'm going to do that really quickly. So it looks something like this, where it's just my hand. It looks like a mitten, right? And then I placed right there X's, and those are my landmarks on certain bony prominences that I would need the splint to shape into. So that what I would end up doing here is cutting. And you would learn this in some of your internships. You do have a basic course in fabrication in school. So now it looks something like this. So what you can do from here is mount it onto your thermoplastic with a special marker that doesn't erase as you pour this in the hot water. And we have a rehabilitation professional pen to do that in.
Right.
So we would shape this, and this is the shape of the particular client that you're working with. You would do that, right? And it would come out floppy. This would be floppy because it's melted. And you would position the client's hand, whatever position that it needs to be. And in this case, the wrist needs to be a little bit back.
Okay.
Right. And so you want to keep in mind right here, I did a little fold because another part of anatomy is we have a crease right here. So if I end up making this up here, then I'm not letting my client close their hand fully, right? It's blocking more joints than needed. So now my client can close their hand, right? And yeah. So the way we support this is adding Velcro pieces to the ends right here. And then cutting any color strap and mounting it on like this. And then we would have another strap here. And I would hold this device onto the client's. And I used my daughter for this. So, but yeah,
she was the model for today.
She was the model, so it's tiny. But yeah, we would end up using several Velcro pieces and then straps. So that again is something that we would only do if we have a prescription by the doctor for it.
Okay.
We won't just fabricate just because we think. Occupational therapists, they work collaboratively with other professionals. So having good communication skills, good socializing skills with other professionals is a requirement as well to be an effective occupational therapist. Working with nurses, working with physical therapists, working with doctors, working with family members as well. So I also have going back to our babies in the NICU, I
Uh-huh.
have a little doll here. So about more than 20 years ago, the American Pediatric Association, they had a campaign to lay your children face up, because there was an increase in sudden infant death syndromes that back in that generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they figured that a lot
my generation.
well, mine too. They figured that a lot of the children were suffocating in their sleep. So
Mm-hmm.
with this big campaign, they were promoting, and it is a very effective education promotion, is to lay your child facing up to prevent the sudden infant death syndromes.
Right.
But along with that we started seeing an increase in flat heads, babies that had a very flat head.
Right.
So if you think about newborns, their heads are fairly soft. So if you can imagine that baby being placed with 24 hours in this position, because a brand new mom is so afraid, that, the doctor said they have to be face up, and they do.
Right.
But now we got a secondary impairment, which is the flat head syndrome. And so what we do, one of the things that we can do in occupational therapy is show new parents how to prevent that flat head syndrome, right, but also prevent sudden infant death syndrome. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we recommend for babies and their families is increased tummy time. So a lot of new parents are afraid to place their babies on their tummy because their neck muscles are so weak. So they're going to be gasping for air. But in occupational therapy, we can teach that when the baby is awake, alert, when the baby's happy, the baby's not sick, and there is proper adult supervision, that baby can be placed on tummy time. This is the number one position that can be worked on to work on these extensor muscles. Of course, right, like I said, with proper adult supervision and when the baby's awake. So one way we can show tummy time is on your chest. You just prop their arms up underneath their chest like this and put them on mom or put them on dad. And they're not totally flat. They're on an incline. They're like this. And they're working their muscles. Mom and dad are right there looking at baby, and they're working out. And that something as simple as that is occupational therapy.
And that helps build up those muscles.
Exactly, yes. And so when you document something like this, we don't just say baby was placed on mommy's chest. We use anatomy terms. We say neck extensor muscles. We say propped up on tummy time on an inclined surface, because this is an inclined surface.
Right.
You're not totally flat. So again, that can help save a baby's life and prevent. And that's just one of many, many, many different ways that occupational therapy can be effective with babies and children.
That's very interesting, because to me, tummy time was a new phenomenon with my grandchildren. Of course, if the doctor said to do it, yes, we did it, but I never really understood why. Thank you for explaining that.
Yes, that's why. We also we're working with, sometimes people will have a stroke, and occupational therapists can work in a hospital helping these individuals recover. Sometimes they have difficulties swallowing or drinking from a cup. What we have here is a modification of a basic cup, but there's a slit in here, as you can see this angle. And so what happens here is sometimes when the person drinks, they may choke. And so a technique is to drink out of this cup, but with your chin tucked in to avoid choking. Mm-hmm. So this is an adaptation to a cup. which has that curve,
Right.
which allows your nose to kind of fit in there. So you're like this drinking, and your nose is not getting
Hitting the wall.
It's not hitting the wall. Exactly. So you're able to drink from it in a safe position while letting your nose not hit the wall.
Right.
So that, that's, who would have thought, right?
No, exactly.
But occupational therapists, they do have a lot of gadgets. Now, sometimes we don't have these items handy and ready for us. We do have a catalog in which we say, oh, okay, this person has difficulty toileting. They might need this. Or a person might have difficulty with their fine motor skills to be able to button their shirt. Mm-hmm. And for that, I have a tool for you to share too.
Okay.
This is called a button hook. It has a hook right there. And it has a kind of like a little rounded thing there. Mm-hmm. So if a person is having difficulty buttoning a shirt, what they would do is thread this part into the slit of where the button is and pull it out. And that would take more of a gross motor movement of your hand to maneuver this rather than pulling and manipulating that button. And I have a shirt here so I can show.
Okay.
Where is it? So here's that little buttonhole right there. And here's that button. So sometimes people who have difficulty with fine motor skills are not able to get this coordination correctly. And you see the frustration in their face. And so after being independent for so many years, now they have somebody else caring for them and doing it. And so that can lead into frustration, depression. But with occupational therapy, we can show them tools like this to be independent. So what you would do is, thread it in here, mm-hmm. Grab onto that button.
Right. And pull it through. Amazing.
So it's more of a gross motor movement than super fine. So that's just another fancy tool that we have.
You get all the good toys.
Any questions up to now? I can keep going.
I haven't opened it up to students yet. And I'm going to tell you, I already know there's going to be a flood of questions because I had the common misconception that you probably only worked with people who have jobs, because you hear occupational, that's a job. So it's people who have jobs. I didn't realize the scope of what you do, from babies to elderly. So let me take a minute and open up the chat. So students, the chat is now open for you to ask questions. Please be patient. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So let me tell you the very first one. There are some fairly common questions that come through. So let me start asking the common ones. So What is your best experience in your career?
My best experience, and it happens along your career, is when you finally have change somebody's functional level of independence from being so dependent on somebody doing something for you, and then just having them have that freedom again, and they express it. When they express it and they give you that thanks, that has to be the best feeling and experience.
I can imagine that is. So the contrast to that is, what's your worst experience?
Well, my worst experience has been, I remember being a new therapist, fresh out of school, when I was an occupational therapist assistant. I worked with this older man, and I placed a hot pack on his back, and I followed protocol as far as checking in on him, letting him know, is the hot pack too hot? Let me know. I can add another towel. And he kept saying, no, everything's great. And I took his word for it. Well, I burned the patient. He had a blister at the end. Come to know that he did not have very good sensation. And so people that have deficits with sensation, determining if it's hot or cold, you don't want to put a hot pack on them.
Right.
And so as a fairly new therapist, you will come into situations where you might make mistakes like that. And sometimes you will have your clients who are understanding about that, and others who will right away want to say like, oh, I want to see your manager. I want to report you. That wasn't the situation with me, thank God. But it was a learning experience, because although they do teach you anatomy and everything to prepare you, nothing prepares you for the real world. And so that was one of the most scariest, worst parts in my career. But I can guarantee you that it never happened again.
Yes.
And I continue to grow in my profession.
What age group do you find the best to work with? Is there any age group that it can be you personally like best, or, professionally, they're the easiest?
Let's see. Well, I can tell you that when you change from one setting into another, you're always going to be considered entry level. So after about 18 years of working with children and in the school district, I came into what I had always thought my passion was sport. And the whole reason why I came into therapy. I was considered entry level coming into the sports industry after 18 years. So I don't know if I answered your question there.
Yes, you did. So the contrast to that then is, which age group do you find the hardest to work with?
For me personally, the elderly are kind of hard for me, only because I feel like I might be a little too sensitive. I see that some of them go through a lot of depression because they lose that independence. Sometimes working in the nursing homes, you get clients that don't have a lot of family members to visit them. And so they just deteriorate physically. They deteriorate. And so that's hard for me. And so I've tried working there, but I know that my heart, it would be too sad to continue. So that would be a hard for me.
So the next question that kind of goes along with that, you really have to know yourself then.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
What makes you tick?
What makes me tick?
No, you have to know what makes you tick.
You definitely have to know what you personally enjoy doing, where your passion is. The great thing about occupational therapy is that you can work with a diversity of people. If you don't like working with children, if you don't have the patience working with them, or with the elderly, then there's a different path for you. You would be doing yourself and the patient a disservice if you just get in there for the money, or just because you're following your friends or whatever. If your passion is not that population, that age group of people, then don't. I would say don't. Don't do it. Yeah.
What skills are necessary to become an occupational therapist?
Sure. You would definitely need to have a strong background in anatomy, some mathematics, statistics is what you would need, data collection, good communication skills. You do sometimes have insurance companies or people that pay for their therapies call and want to deny payment or deny services. And so you have to be able to rely back to your data and justify yourself. justify the therapy and justify the numbers as to why this person continues to need occupational therapy. There is a fine line between a person not progressing and a person just wanting to come to therapy just to socialize.
Right.
Insurance companies won't pay for that. And you have to be ready when they call to justify, to have the legality, the legal terms to be able to justify why your therapy is skilled and why it's still needed.
Mm-hmm. So are the tools that you were showing us expensive?
No, well, yes and no. Just depending on certain items might be $20 or below. I know in certain websites like Walmart, they might have other gadgets too for adapting the way of living. So you could find cheaper products there too. You would just go in there and search something like difficulty opening a jar, and then you'll have a list of different gadgets. But the ones I showed you are more, they have a brand, they're more name brand according to that, more rehabilitative. So yes and no.
What happens if a patient can't afford the tool?
What happens if they cannot afford a tool? If they can't afford it, sometimes if your company does allow you to give it to them as a pro bono, other times that's not allowed. Because if you do it for one patient, you have to do it for everybody.
Right.
And so you just have to check with your company. And if it's really a tool that's necessary, what we can do, as you saw where we fabricated something like this, we can go ahead and try to make this out of hard plastic material.
Right.
Just the best that we can.
Have you ever discovered a new way of using a tool that may have been meant for something else?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, with occupational therapy, there's always discoveries in there. There's never just the right way. So for example, in the school districts, sometimes children have visual perception problems. And so one of the best things to do is have some type of slant board so that they're able to write up in a slant, because that positions their eyes in a certain position to be able to see better. And so these slant boards cost, X amount of money, and sometimes school districts are not going to pay for something like that. But I discovered that having a 3-inch binder, you could, yeah, let me just grab it right here. Getting a 3-inch binder like so. This is what I was using back there. It's actually a slant board.
It is.
Right?
You're right.
So all we would have to do is modify this by either putting a clip on top or some type of Velcro to hold the paper intact. So sometimes I use this over my computer too, just so I can position my wrist in a certain position to avoid carpal tunnel.
That's a great idea. I need to do that. There's going to be a run on 3-inch binders now. What are the most common injuries?
Most common injuries? Right now, in the setting that I'm at, we're seeing a lot of wrist fractures. A lot of people are having a lot of falls. And so we're seeing several people with that. We're seeing a lot of finger fractures, a lot of people who are in sports and they have some traumatic hit to their fingers. So sometimes if you don't have that taken care of, you have a deformity to the finger that kind of stays locked in a certain position and it does not work the way it should. So we're seeing a lot of fingers and wrists injuries right now.
What motivated you or inspired you to go into occupational therapy? Was there anything in particular?
Once I found out that it was more than just working with the body, what I had when I was young, that's all I wanted to do, is something sporty, something that had to do with the body. Once I realized that it was more than just that there was more meaning behind it, making an impact in somebody's life to regain function, regain their independence, that was kind of like the cherry on top.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for people who want to pursue this career?
Yeah, go for it. I would say do it. I would say if you have the opportunity to apply for occupational therapy, after you've done your research, go for it. It's a very rewarding job. What other jobs can you get? Would you find that you can work with children? You can work in different settings. If you're up for a challenge, and sometimes we go through those different periods in our lives where we're saying, you know what, I think I'm done working in the school district. I want to challenge myself and now work in the hospitals. I want to now work, you can even go as far as working for big corporations like Microsoft or Apple. I don't know if you guys are aware that Xbox made a new gaming switch that's adaptive for people that have special needs. And so I believe in one of the Super Bowl commercials, they broadcasted that commercial where there was a child who wasn't able to use the gaming system, and they made the controller a little bit wider, more buttons so they can press with their wrist as opposed to doing the fine motor skills, and they were able to game. And an occupational therapist helped design that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the sky's your limit in occupational therapy. If you have a certain gadget that hasn't been invented yet, you can invent it.
Mm-hmm.
You can be, this job has it all. It has math, it has science, it has engineering, it has creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the sky's your limit.
Exactly. So PATHS stands for Pathways Aligned to Health Science. So I want you to talk a little bit, because our students enter their careers at different points. Some get certificates, some get associates, some get bachelors, some are already thinking of masters and PhDs. So can you tell us a little bit about the pathways to enter occupational therapy?
Sure, there are different levels. There is right now occupational therapy at its entry level, they're requiring a master's degree. There are no more bachelor's degrees in occupational therapy. Now, the talk is that in the next 10 or 15 years, they want to make it a doctorate's degree.
Mm-hmm.
So that means a fresh, brand new therapist would need a doctorate. But right now, that's not the case. Right now, you can go into a master's and be an occupational therapist. If you choose to be an occupational therapist assistant, that would be 2 years at a community college. It's occupational therapy assistants are practitioners, just like occupational therapists. They are not, they don't do the evaluation portion, which is a big distinguish between the master's degree and the associates, is that as a master's, you have the training and the theory to do an evaluation, to interpret the data. And occupational therapists, assistants, work more hands-on with the patient. So if you're more of a people person and not so much of a data collector, occupational therapy assistant is an awesome path. They are respected in the profession because they do take a rigorous state exam, and you do get licensed and a national accreditations as well, even in your 2-year degree. Now there is also an aide or a therapy aide or a therapy tech, which, if I'm not mistaken, requires a certificate, which is about maybe 6 months to a year. What they do is they don't do any documentation. They don't do the evaluation. What they do is more of the setup. They set up for the therapist. They clean up. They walk the patient in. They walk the patient out. But it's not as skilled, and it's not considered skilled.
Right.
So there are different pathways, and like I said, I started off with my 2-year degree because I did not have the college entrance score to go get my master's right away.
Right.
But I graduated summa cum laude. So once I got in there, I was a different person. Your score does not determine your success. Whatever score that you do get, and it's not what you thought you would get, that's not a determination of your endpoint. If you have a goal in being whatever that you want to be, you go for it. You find a different path, and you don't stop until you get there. And those are the different paths.
That's awesome. What are some of the things that students, because we have mostly high school students, we may have some middle school students, what are some things that they can do now to prepare themselves to be an occupational therapist?
What you can do now is find a place where they do take students or volunteers to just observe what occupational therapy is. And so what you can do is do observation. You could do in more than one setting, because when you do apply to the occupational therapy program, they will ask for any volunteer hours, and every school has different requirements. So just because you're looking at maybe UTRGV and they say we want 40 hours of observation hours, right, another university might require less or more. So it's different for every school. So if you can right now as a student, reach out to some occupational therapists and see if they'll allow observations. Some right now, because of the whole COVID situation, that might be harder to do, right, but maybe something virtually where they can, you can interview an occupational therapist. That's one thing you can do.
What is the most challenging, I'm going to say thing, but I don't mean thing. What is the most challenging part of your occupation?
The most challenging part is sometimes when the client reaches a point of that's the maximum level that their body can attain at that time, at that moment, conveying that to the person. Because sometimes we say that, all things are possible, but we also need to be realistic too. And without shedding anybody's dreams or anybody's hope, you don't ever want to discourage somebody by saying you'll never be able to do this again, because you never know. You always want that hope in the person. But sometimes taking a break from therapy is when sometimes people grow the most and repair their muscles, and then maybe coming back after that rest. And having that conversation is difficult at times, and it's challenging because you don't want to seem like a dream crusher. Right. But having that conversation is difficult at times.
Do you find then that you spend most of your time working alone, or do you work more on it as a team?
We work just depending on the setting. Like, for example, if we work with babies 0 to 3, 0, like freshly brand new, up to the age of 3, you're working hand in hand with the family. You're working with the parents. That has to be a strong team between the parents and the physicians. If you're working in the school district, you are a team. You're just one member out of several people, the school teacher, the coach, the lunch people. And so you have to, be able to work with a big team. Right now where I'm at, we do have other occupational therapists, but we have our individual caseloads, and then we come together to discuss our difficult cases, but then we go back individually and work on our individual caseload. So it just depending on the setting.
Do you find that your job is stressful?
That's an interesting question. Again, depending on the setting, we do have certain quotas to meet. Certain productivity is what we call. Occupational therapists and anybody in the medical field, we are subjective to productivity. So what that means is you have to be productive in your skilled therapy as many times as you can throughout the short period of window that you're working. And sometimes that does determine how they're going to fund the therapy program. I know with some companies that have had to shut down because their productivity was low, and without that productivity, they don't get reimbursed. And then how do you pay your employees?
Right.
So you are expected to produce, you are expected to work, you are expected to see your patients and turn around and do your documentation within a confined amount of time that is allotted before the next patient is in. So that can be stressful.
Yes, it can be. I can see that. As we get ready to close out the session, I think I want to end with this, and it's been asked several times, and it's always asked. What is the best part of your occupation?
The best part of my occupation is being able to work with people from all different ages and all different capabilities, whether it be something that they were congenitally born with, maybe without an arm, to somebody who has always had their arm and then just had an accident that they no longer have. That's the best part, is being able to help all types of people, not just one, not just working with the hand, working with the holistically the person. That has to be the best part of my job.
I'm glad to hear that. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate you sharing all the information about your occupation. Like I said at the beginning, if I had to list 5 that students want to learn about, occupational therapy is always at the top of the list. So I want to thank you for being here today. Students, I want to thank you for joining us. I do think we have one more Cybermentoring in May that we'll be finishing up for the year. Have a great day. Do well on your tests. Let's finish the year strong. And thank you.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone.